The L.O.V.E. Leadership Academy with Cindy Willcocks is a brand new podcast about dreaming big and living your best life. There is only now, this very moment in time. So let go of the past, avoid worrying about the future, and focus on being your authentic self.
Hello, my name's Cindy Willcocks and I'm the director of R10, Enriching the Next Generation, CIC. It's a not-for-profit company with social purpose and helps people to live healthy, happy lives. And I've been joined today by Kane Minkus, who's not in the UK currently. Do you want to say a bit about yourself, Kane, and how I've managed to encourage you to come and be interviewed about the L.O.V.E. Leadership Academy today?
So I'm in lovely Silicon Valley, where our head offices are, and we're a global investment portfolio and training organization where we work with entrepreneurs, business owners all over the world. We've had 3 million people come through our trainings over the last 15 years. And what we're focused on is helping business owners consciously grow their businesses and be conscious leaders, which is a whole topic unto itself. But that's what we do. And of course, we're coming to you kind of from our homes at this point. So that's great.
Amazing.
Love it to be here.
Thanks for agreeing to chat with me about the model of L.O.V.E. leadership. It's part of the L.O.V.E. Leadership Academy. And
Totally.
I'm a mental health nurse, as you know. I've been a mental health nurse for over 20 years, trauma therapist. I love people and I love encouraging people to live happy, healthy lives. So that's what this is all about. So L.O.V.E. leadership is about conducting yourself as a leader of you and then of other people. And it stands for listen, own, voice and power. And I've got a few questions today just to ask you and just get some feedback from you about what you think. So to start off,
Let's do it.
The first principle of L.O.V.E. leadership is about listening. So in terms of listening, can you recall a time where you have felt listened to and what impact did that have on you? And then the other side of that is, can you recall a time when you weren't listened to and how was that for you? So.
Well, I have 3 children, so I'm often not listened to. So that one's a little bit easier to recall. Funny enough, my youngest daughter, now that we're at home, we're together so much, the family. My youngest daughter and I were just having this conversation. She's 5 years old, and she has been throwing fits for very simple things. And I finally sat her down. I said, what's going on? And she says, I don't feel like you listen to me. Now, I feel like I do, but it really brought up the idea of, when we're listening to others, what does that feel like to them versus when we think we're listening to others? And we kind of started to have that conversation. So to answer your question, when I'm listened to, certainly I feel important and I feel like somebody is engaged. For me, presence is a big component to building the cultures in our company. I started my first business 20 years ago. I was 20 years old. Actually, it'll be 22 years ago now. Shh, don't tell anybody. And my first company was a media company in California. I grew it to about 212 employees. We had studios all over the world. We had animators. We were a media company. So I had a lot of people that we had to be leading and leaders of leaders and, hierarchy of things like that. Naturally, presence was a big component of what we worked on with our leaders, and we had to be a leadership training team at the top. So we had to train people to listen to others, what's the difference between active listening, passive listening, how to have people feel listened to, and the importance of that. So as a leader, I 100, if I'm communicating that to our leaders and I want to feel listened to, it's absolutely important that I'm getting presence. And of course, when I feel listened to, I feel that they're taking it seriously, that the communication has been had. I think for me, if I deliver communication, I don't feel like it's been received. It makes me feel frustrated. And so my wife and I we teach communication all over the world, and of course, experts are always perfect at everything in their lives. So when I deliver communication to her or she delivers communication to me and I'm like, I get a firsthand understanding of what it either feels like or can feel, like to the other person when they're not listened to. It's a very powerful connection, right? Feeling heard or listened to really drives things like significance and importance. If you don't feel heard in the world, you will attempt to figure out how to feel heard. And that means that you will continue to seek, and I do as the same thing. I continue to seek to be heard, to feel important.
Yeah, definitely. And I like the way that you use words powerful. It's about a powerful connection. When you're really feeling like you listen to it, it's about that powerful connection, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
And sometimes we need to work on that for ourselves as individuals as well, don't we? So like
Yes.
listening to ourselves and knowing when that's right, and knowing when we need to ignore some of that dialogue that happens.
Well, the evolved version is where you know that that's going on for you, so that if you don't feel heard, you don't make it about yourself. But that's the evolved version, and we know none of us are very evolved, even those of us that study evolution.
Exactly.
We're always evolved in the theories and in the teaching, but then when it happens to us, we're like, hey, you didn't listen to me.
True. Very true.
I don't feel heard in this relationship. I'm going to go cry. So
thinking about kind of like owning our stuff, which is the next part of love leadership. So we have listen and then we have own. I think about ownership, remembering your roots, knowing who you're being in any given conversation, knowing how family and culture and people maybe that you've never even met impact on who you are in that moment. And with that in mind, I'm just wondering, what's the biggest challenge you faced, had to overcome in order to own your stuff?
Yeah, the biggest challenge is catching yourself in it. And my wife and I, who run our company together and have for 8 years, have been partners in business. And she's also a very accomplished serial entrepreneur, had one of the largest tourism businesses in Italy, and had, I think, 150 or plus staff, something like that. We practice between the two of us because not only are we together as as a couple, but we also lead a team and lead a company. In this company, we have about 50 staff that we manage, so we would consider this small staff. But we practice a lot with how we work together and communicate together, and then we bring that back into our leadership with our team. So one of the things that, and of course it's much more intense as a couple, although we are leaders together, right? So it's like mom and dad leading the company. When mom and dad are fighting, it's not a good representation for the team. And so in our world, we have what these things are called exit ramps, where we attempt to identify the trigger points. So we look for triggers, and then we design exit ramps. In other words, when we think about owning our stuff, we think about being able to identify a trigger before we become reactive. So we feel like when we're not owning our stuff, to think about it the other way, we get reactive when something happens. So somebody does something, or somebody doesn't listen, or something. Let's say she's talking to me and I'm reading something on my phone. She, of course, can make up a story about what that means, right? And that's a trigger. It's a trigger where something would happen. And of course, the reactive response is to create some sort of disempowering story. I'm not important to him. He doesn't care, whatever it is, right? And we do it vice versa. If I'm talking to her, and the same thing. In the meantime, we have trained ourselves to become aware of those reactive, responsive trigger moments, so that we can say, oh, I'm doing my story thing. We become responsible for it, but we have to be aware of it. If you're not aware of it, then it feels like it is what it is. You move right into anger or frustration, and you feel like, of course, the first thing you do is you project and you blame the other person. Well, that was their fault. They did something that made me angry. And so right in that collapse, which happens within just milliseconds, the human can actually become capable of catching ourselves between the trigger, the story, and the response. There's a little bit of a time window in there, and if you train yourself well enough, you can have you typically can't train yourself out of the reaction. You'll have the trigger, rather. The trigger, we find, is something a little bit more complex to have that go away. And we've studied things like neurolinguistics and NLP to help people recode their brain so that the trigger does stop triggering them. And it can happen. You can actually recode your brain for no trigger. But in, let's say, for the practical and the world where you haven't pulled that trigger out yet and become triggerless, the trigger happens, right? Then the story happens, and then the response happens, the reaction. So in that little time gap, what we've trained ourselves to do is see that trigger, story, response sequence. And in that moment, we become aware, and usually we become aware of our feelings, right? So I might say something, let's say just as an example, she doesn't do this that often, but just an example. She's on her phone and I talk to her and she's not really listening. I can immediately feel an emotion there's like a trigger, and that story may even just happen unconsciously, like I'm not important. And then I have an emotion. So if we break it down a little bit more, trigger, story, emotion, response to that emotion. And it's the emotion that I'm most able to be present to and get immediate access to and have it up in my face. Not always so aware of the trigger, certainly not so much aware of the story, but when that emotion rises, like anger or something, I've learned to become aware of that and say, wow, I'm having an emotion. Before I respond to it, let's take an exit ramp. Now, an exit ramp is anything that you choose as a behavior to do differently than the typical response you would have. So if I would have, let's say, an angry response, you're not listening to me. I'll give you actually a real world example between the two of us. My wife would consider herself a bit more of an introvert. I'm highly extroverted. So I like to talk through a lot of strategies. And sometimes I'll share a whole strategy with her and then I'll wait. And it'll seem like she's not responding or not taking it, but she's actually processing it. And so as a trigger, I can get triggered by saying, she's not even paying attention. She didn't even take it seriously. She's not engaging, whatever the story is, right? And I can feel frustration or anger. And it is in that moment that I have to say, okay, I have two abilities to respond now. I can either respond angrily, or I can invite her to share her experience, what's going on for her. That's one of our exit ramps, is to ask the other person, what is your experience, what's going on? It's not like, what are you thinking about? It's not like from an angry standpoint. It's from it could be from a bit of an acting standpoint. It doesn't have to be authentic or pure in the moment, because what we find is that if the trigger happens, the story collapses into it, and then I get this emotion and I'm angry and frustrated that she's not responding or engaging. But I say to her in an actor's world, so love, what are you thinking about? How does that hit you? And I'm kind of like keeping back the anger for a second. And then she'll say, well, I'm just processing all the different options and what might happen if we do that. And suddenly all the anger dissipates. Yeah. And it dissipates because I actually get a chance to understand what's going on for her. Stephen Covey used to say, seek to understand first. And that's a very important part of leadership prior to response or reactivation.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you for sharing that. It's a really good example. And I think sometimes to talk about it sounds quite easy, but actually putting it into practice, I think we all take our time over that maybe.
There's a book that I read a long time ago, and the title says it all. It's called After Enlightenment Comes the Dishes. And I love it because it's such a perfect reality.
I love it. So you were talking there about the actor's voice and saying, maybe just kind of taking a breath and saying something that might enable a better conversation or a different conversation than one that's based on emotion. So the next part of love leadership is about having a voice and not being afraid to use it, recognizing that to enable other people to have a voice and not be afraid to use it, you have to listen. So it's about, is there ever a time for you where you felt like you've not been able to use your voice and wish you had? Is that something that you can kind of resonate with, or maybe not so
Sure.
much? But
so this is a great question. And, we work with so many, every year I see about 60,000 entrepreneurs at our conferences and our live events and things. And our mentorship team literally engages with over 2,000 business owners a year, coaching them on calls and meetings and seminars and things like that, our kind of our private inner circle group. So we get really intimate in those groups. And we have for, 15 years. So we've had roughly 15,000 business owners go through our private mentoring programs. And I'm just sharing that to say we've had a lot of intimate conversations to understand what's going on in their world. And I think that's what's most interesting when we share that with people, because, you can read a book or two, or you can talk to a few people, but when you have that kind of vast reservoir of experience in talking to people and hearing what's really going on for them, you get a really interesting data collection. And I will tell you that our experience is that women entrepreneurs often say the most that they have the hardest time asking for what they want, making demands or requests for several reasons. And I'm just feeding you back the feedback that they've given to us, which is, one is they don't want to feel like they're being a nuisance or a bother sometimes. Sometimes they feel like they're coming across demanding, or sometimes they say they feel like they're taking from somebody something. And it sometimes moves into their sales, right? Which actually Alessia talks a lot about around women in sales, is that willingness to ask for things, which includes asking for money in a sales process. But it's certain. I think we've seen that men are wired a little bit more comfortably to request and ask for things. We won't really go into why, but it's just sort of what it is. And of course, men have their challenges in requesting, women have their challenges in requesting. But I think it all comes down, no matter men or women or whatever, it all comes down to this feeling of either being a burden, or there's this essence of, I feel hard asking for it. I have, being as an extrovert, I've never had a hard time asking for what I want. However, sometimes when it gets into like my personal relationship with Alessia, asking for what I want, I can feel like, is this going to sensitively make her feel bad if I ask for what I want? And so I can understand from both sides why somebody might not ask for what they want because they're concerned about how it feels. It is, I think, a real evolutionary experience to be able to ask for what you want, hold a space of love, and not feel so concerned about the response, whether it's going to be a rejection, because you can ask for what you want and someone can say no, right? Or making it feel like you're hurting the other person. This is actually a very complex thing. Otherwise, it would be easy and everybody would just ask for what they want.
Okay.
So there's a couple ways that people can ask for what they want. They can disconnect emotionally and just ask for what they want, which is fine, but not the best leadership approach. As you can hear, we've got our...
I love it.
As COVID has had us to have the children at home all day long. So you can ask for what you want and disconnect emotionally from the person, which is not the strongest place for leadership. It is definitely a place that most people go. I don't care what they want, just tell them what you want.
Yeah.
That's not the most evolved version. The most evolved version is where you ask for what you want, first of all, in a responsible and a caring way. And an old friend of mine named Dr. John DeMartini, who's a gentleman from the movie The Secret, brilliant author, great speaker and educator. He used to say there's three types of care. There's caring, careful, and careless. And careful and careless don't get you the same results as caring. I thought it was always a brilliant model to think about. When you speak to people, if you do it from a caring place, you're actually holding a space for them. When you do it from a careful place, you're holding a space for yourself. And when you do it from a careless place, you're not holding a space for anybody. And what I mean by holding a space is just being willing to create a space for emotion, for feelings. And I think men especially, one of the things that we shy away from is we shy away from strong emotions or things like disappointment or rejection. This is a big one for men. So we're likely to avoid conversations or disconnect emotionally from conversations around requests if we think there might be disappointment or rejection. So there's one tip that I would suggest, because this is what we went through with our coaches. And I'd love to say I'm, Mr. Brilliant and figure this all out ourselves. But actually, we worked with advisors and coaches and leadership trainers, and we've worked with people and tested things. And that's, I think, the way you best evolve is you work with people that hold you in a container to test and advise you with great techniques. And what we did is, as a man, I had to know that I could ask my partner for things, and that she might have strong emotions, and that I could hold the container of love and support through that emotional stage to arrive at the other side. And I had to know that the triggers that she might have were her own and not about me. So if I requested her, when you use a simple and totally something that didn't necessarily happen, but let's say I wanted to do something as silly as I wanted to tell my wife, hey, I'd like, actually Sting uses this example. He says, telling a songwriter that you don't like their song is like telling them that their girlfriend's breath stinks, right? Some things can be very sensitive, right? So if I wanted to say to Alessia, hey, you need a mint or something on stage, because we've been talking well, right? If I said to her, you need a mint, and she might get feeling angry, like he doesn't like me, or he doesn't feel I'm attractive or whatever, I have to be able to hold that space, and this is all hypothetical, but I have to be able to hold that space for her to go through that emotion, knowing that it's her trigger, and just keep that love there. And at some point, when that goes down, we can then just deal with the requests.
Yeah.
So it is very important to be responsible with how you're requesting things. Many people don't request until they're so built up with emotion that they explode with a request. And then it does come across as demanding or angry or commanding. It's just something that doesn't feel good to the other person. We need to make sure that we ask the request when we want it, and we maintain care, and we hold the space for emotion. That seems to be the best way to make it happen.
Amazing. Thank you. That's some great tips there. And it's a challenge, I think, to challenge and support with love, because because we are very complex as human beings. And we all have things to work through too. So just thinking about, again, the model of love leadership, we've got listen, own, voice. The next one's empower. And I talk about empowerment through engaging and educating ourselves and others. I was just wondering, how do you know that you're feeling empowered? What does empowerment mean to you? How would you actually know you're empowered?
So I feel empowered when I have a couple things. I feel empowered when I have a clear vision of what I want. vision of my future. I feel empowered when I feel like I understand the pathway to get there. I feel empowered when I have the tools and the resources that are going to help me get there. And I think that the last one might be free will or choice. So you put those things together in a little, mixture, and I think every human being, including myself, starts to feel very empowered. Because if we can choose, we have the ability to choose. If we feel like we're clear about where we're going, the steps to get there, and we have the resources to get there, I feel like we can actually get motivated. I often speak on stages with people like Les Brown, he's one of the top motivational speakers in the world, or Tony Robbins, or Richard Branson, or top speakers and educators. And many of them are motivating the audience. And I've always had a slightly different relationship to motivation, even though they're all wonderful, these people I mentioned. And I love listening to them to get motivated as well. But what I've noticed around professionals and business and leaders and training teams and engaging teams and motivating teams is that you don't need to actually motivate them or inspire them. You just need to get them those 4 things: free will to choose. And of course, if you have to have them choose inside of certain parameters, it's different. It's like when we work with children, if you just tell children what they're going to do, they tend to be very defiant. If you give them a choice between 1 and 2, hey, which one would you like? They're actually much happier to choose. Would you like broccoli or carrots for dinner, right? Versus you're going to have broccoli, right? If you say broccoli only, they're going to say, I don't want broccoli, I'm not going to eat it. But if you say broccoli or carrots, they may say, I'll take the broccoli. Yeah. So giving them that choice, I think, is very important to allow leaders to feel like they can choose. Naturally, if you're a leader of organizations and teams, you've got professionals and adults. They want to feel like they're empowered to make choices. But then actually having them have clarity in where they're going, and then understanding exactly what steps they're going to get that's going to get them there. Because my experience is that when people don't know where they're going, they lack clarity, they get afraid because they don't want to take a step if they don't know where they're going. Or if they don't understand the exact steps as to how they're going to get there, they're concerned about making mistakes. And then the last one is having the resources. If they don't feel like they have the resources, they can have the vision, they can know how to get there, but they don't really feel like they can. They don't have the actual tools to get there. It's like putting them at the bottom of Kilimanjaro and saying, you're going to get to the top and you're going to follow this pathway, but I'm not going to give you anything to get there. You're not going to have any food, you're not going to have any water, you're not going to have any tents. And they're going to say, well, I don't think I can do it. They're not going to feel empowered.
Yeah, great to think about these things too. So I think empowerment for people can mean different things. And I think when we talk about empowerment in L.O.V.E. leadership, we talk about empowering ourselves, empowering other people, and also change, people evolving, like you said, can sometimes feel scary, feel uncertain. So people may not do those things if they're not feeling empowered. So yeah, great to hear from you.
Cool.
So we're coming towards the end of our kind of interview together. I was just wondering, what's the biggest lesson that you've learned personally and or professionally?
Around leadership, or just in general, the biggest lesson I've ever learned?
Generally,
biggest lesson I've ever learned is a happy wife is a happy life.
I heard that before.
It's the best lesson I've ever learned. So just give me a context. You mean leadership or just in general? Because that is the best lesson I've ever learned. And I think every married gentleman out there will resonate with that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just personally or in business. So if that's the lesson.
So yeah, I mean, maybe let me move that to maybe something slightly more valuable for your viewership. I think balance is maintaining a life that is balanced is super important. I think the most important thing that I've learned in my life, whether it's with my kids or with my businesses or with my own pursuits or with my wife or family, whatever, every year, when there's a balance and the human being feels balance in different dimensions, balance between their health, balance between their relationships, balance between their the time they take for achievements, balance the work versus their physical fitness, and money versus time off. Like that balance, I think, is the most important. We talk a lot about balance when we choose projects or we choose activities. We really look at, is this balanced in our world? How do we want to schedule our year? When we sit down at the end of the year, we schedule out our next year. We look at how many tours we want to do. We live between several countries, so we look at how much time we spend there. What is the balance? Because I think as soon as humans go out of balance, that's when all the problems start, whether it's between each other. For example, we just come out of shutdown and lockdown, quarantine with COVID as of now, for whenever people are watching this. And that really shifted the balance. And I'll tell you that we're going to month 3 now. We're at about 90 days in California. And the first 30 to 45 days, man, it was very tough. It was very out of balance, very confusing, very intense. We had not expected to spend the year homeschooling our kids and having them around us 24 hours a day. And, we have in-laws that came in from Italy, and they got trapped here because they couldn't go back to Italy. And suddenly the balance was just out. And that really caused a lot of tension and a lot of challenge. Until we were able to rebalance, we couldn't find a good flow. Now we actually feel great. We're actually secretly hoping that we could just stay like this, because we found a really good balance in the new, human beings are very adaptive. We're great at adapting, and we have adapted, and we found a great balance. And so now as things reopen, even though it's going back to normal, it will be a complex shift back, because now it's going to shift out of the balance that we've created here. So that's a big conversation for us. I'm really always checking in with myself. Does this feel balanced? Was what I'm choosing going to be a balanced thing? And many times I'm not actually the best judge. I really have to go to my wife and say, can you help me? Because I will often design my life out of balance without noticing it. And I don't actually feel it until it's really gotten out of balance. And so I rely on external people, whether it's coaches or other leaders in the organization or my wife or people that I trust, my family. And I say, what do you think about this? Does it feel like this would be balanced? And many times people say, no way, that seems crazy and out of balance. And whether I listen to them or not is another conversation. But at least I get the feedback. What's that?
I was going to say, does that actually make a difference?
Well, it does. It bounces around in there. My wife likes to say she gives me advice, and then I actually listen to it like 3 months later, which is not good, because as professional advisors and mentors, we always ask our students to react. But we see the same thing. We work with our students and we give them advice, and they resist it for 3 months and 4 months. They come back and they say, "Oh, you were right." As parents, we've learned that it's sometimes par for the course. Sometimes you give your children advice. I have to give my children advice, and they reject it flat out. And then I say, it'll just bounce around in there for weeks, months, or years, and it'll come to fruition. But anyways, the story around balance is really, I think that's the biggest lesson I've learned, is that balance is powerfully important for our health, for our psychology, and for our effectiveness.
Yeah, amazing. And I don't think you're alone in enjoying lockdown. I think I've had quite a few conversations with people who have also enjoyed lockdown and not looking forward to it being unlocked.
I will tell you that parents have gotten the hardest. They got the hardest gig with this. We see our single friends who have no children posting, "Oh my God, I'm so productive. This has been amazing. I've gotten time of forced vacation." I'm like, you should try having a 10-year-old, a 5-year-old, and an 11-month-old.
Yeah.
It was intense. We'll say it was intense.
Amazing. Hats off to all those that are homeschooling. Yeah,
That's right.
I was lucky not to have to venture into that. Just help from afar. So I'm just thinking about the love leadership, the model of love leadership, how people conduct themselves as a leader of them and then others. Do you think it's something that could be useful in business? So we've talked about listening, owning, voicing, and empowering.
Yeah, well, I mean, the whole concept of love leadership it's a very important time right now, because it really looks at the way people lead versus fear versus love. And when you're leading through fear, you cannot be your greatest leadership self. You can do it. I mean, organizations are led through fear all the time. It's classic in corporate world that corporate world is fear. And actually, what I loved about California, having lived here for the last 20 years, well, I've lived in and out of here for 20 years. We lived overseas and things. But what I loved about living in California and seeing is that it's a very young, it's a tech culture in Silicon Valley. And so it's very young. So it's very, very progressive. And a lot of companies learned 10, 15 years back here that you're not going to be able to drive culture through fear. You're going to have to drive it through respect and love. And, it's complex. It's not an easy thing. Otherwise, every culture would be doing it through love and they'd all be successful. But that's why it requires advisors, mentors. It requires experts who can help people implement a love leadership-oriented system into their corporations or into their organizations so that they can. And the fact of the matter is you'll always get farther through love than you will through fear. You can motivate through fear. Certainly people, the carrot and the stick, people will take action. They'll move away from pain, but it's not going to create a culture where you're going to get the most out of people. And today, in order to keep your business lean and get the most you can, doing it from a place of love leadership is going to get you a lot more out of a lot less. So a lot less expenses and a lot more value, a lot more talent, creativity, innovation in your business. And who wouldn't want that with their team?
Amazing. Yeah, wise words there. And so just thank you for that, Kane. And I've got one more question, and it's about who you admire the most. So I'm not sure whether that's one person or a group or people interpret that in lots of different ways, but so yeah.
So I don't admire anybody the most. I mean, there's some, Phil, I could say I admire myself the most. I admire my wife, but actually, what I really admire is I admire people that are pushing the boundaries, and they're doing things that seem crazy to themselves and others, but they're doing it in positive ways, of course, in an effect to achieve a vision that they see. Something that I was born and raised in a very conservative family, and I had a vision around things that I wanted to do in the media industry and the music industry. I was a musician, a record producer when I got started. And my family, we're very close, there was a lot of doubt that you could make money or be impactful. And I just kept that vision going. We created a very successful media company early on. And I learned very early that you have to really stay focused on your vision and push forward evolution through your vision and not allow others to get in the way of that vision. And so I really admire anybody who's doing that. I don't care if they're a stay-at-home mom. I don't care if they're a multi-billionaire, whether it's Bill Gates or whether it's it was Steve Jobs or a mom at home who's got a vision for something, a new product that can help babies, and it doesn't make a difference to me. And even I don't even have to like their personalities. Bill Gates has controversial personality. Steve Jobs had controversial personality parts. It doesn't really matter. I admire people who are pushing forward the evolution of ideas, regardless of other people, saying what they say. In fact, we live down the street here from Tesla in California, and of course, Elon has been a very controversial figure. I think anybody who's really pushing forward evolution tends to have a very complex personality. You kind of have to be a complex person to be willing to go against the grain of everybody else. And I think it shows up in two ways. There's the power, the advantages of it, and then there's the pushback from those around you. So you always get these complex personalities of people that are really pushing. And I think that's what I admire. I admire people being willing to be roasted in the news in order to keep pushing forward their ideas. I just admire those people. I don't care who they are. I just think they're great.
Amazing. Yeah, that's some good thoughts there, and it's nice to hear that, because there certainly are some wise people out there doing great things, and it's good to celebrate that, I think. Even if they do have complex personalities.
Cool. Thank you so much for this. This was fun.
Yeah, no, it was really great, and thanks for taking the time, because I know you're a very busy person with all that you do, so much love to you, and thanks very much for coming on and agreeing to the interview.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
You've listened to a podcast by the L.O.V.E Leadership Academy with Cindy Willcocks. Thank you for listening, and to learn more about the model of L.O.V.E leadership, search online for Draw a Heart Around It, a revolutionary mental health treatment for individuals and companies, written by Cindy Willcocks. Dream big and live your best life.